Single mom found 3 dying German shepherds. What happened next will make everyone cry. On a frozen winter road, a single mom slams on her brakes. Her headlights reveal 3 German shepherds lying in the snow, barely alive. She knows she can't afford this, but her young son is begging her to save them. That decision pulls them into a mystery bigger than survival, because these aren't ordinary dogs. They carry scars of war and secrets of a soldier who vanished years ago. As the town whispers about hidden truths, and the soldier's daughter shows up demanding answers, the single mom realizes she hasn't just rescued dogs, she's uncovered a legacy of sacrifice, regret, and redemption. But when the weakest shepherd collapses, and the past threatens to break open, did saving these dogs uncover a path to healing or a storm that could tear them all apart? Let me know in the comments which city or country you're listening from. If you like stories that connect us, don't forget to subscribe before you leave. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the snow-covered landscape as Lydia Harper's old van rumbled down the rural road. The heater wheezed valiantly against the frigid winter air that seemed to seep through every crack and crevice. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles white from both cold and tension as she navigated the slippery road. In the passenger seat, 10-year-old Ethan bounced with enthusiasm, his breath fogging up the window as he talked about his latest school project. "And Mrs. Peterson says we can bring in anything that shows how pioneers lived. Can we look in Grandpa's old trunk in the attic, Mom? I bet there's cool stuff in there." Lydia smiled despite her weariness. "Sure, honey. This weekend we can." Her words cut off as the van's headlights swept across something in the field beside them. 3 dark shapes lay motionless in the snow. Lydia's foot instinctively hit the brake pedal, the van sliding slightly before coming to a stop. "Mom, look." Ethan pressed his face against the window. "Are those dogs?" Lydia squinted through the gathering dusk. The shapes were indeed dogs, large ones, sprawled in the snow about 50 feet from the road. German shepherds, by the look of them. "They're not moving." Ethan's voice cracked with worry. Before Lydia could stop him, he had already unbuckled his seatbelt and thrown open the door. "Ethan, wait!" Lydia called out, but her son was already trudging through the knee-deep snow. With a sigh, she grabbed her flashlight from the glove compartment and followed him out into the biting cold. The wind whipped around them as they made their way to the dogs. As they got closer, Lydia's heart sank. The 3 German shepherds were thin, their fur matted with ice and snow. They wore worn military-style collars, but no tags. Ethan dropped to his knees beside the nearest dog. "Mom, this one's breathing. They're alive." Lydia swept the flashlight beam over the animals. All 3 were indeed breathing, though barely. Their breaths came in shallow puffs, visible in the freezing air. "We have to help them," Ethan pleaded, his eyes wide and filling with tears. "Please, Mom, we can't leave them here. They'll die." Lydia's mind raced with practical concerns. They barely had enough money for their own food, let alone 3 large dogs. The vet bills alone could be astronomical. And where had they come from? Someone must be missing them. But looking at her son's face, and then at the suffering animals, she knew she couldn't just drive away. "Okay," she said, already shrugging off her coat, "but we have to work fast." They covered the dogs with Lydia's coat and the old blankets they kept in the van for emergencies. The largest shepherd, clearly the leader, managed to lift its head slightly when they approached, giving a weak thump of its tail. The other 2 remained still, but their eyes followed the human's movements. "It's okay," Ethan whispered, gently stroking the leader's head. "We're going to help you." Getting the dogs into the van proved challenging. Even in their weakened state, they were heavy, and Lydia's back protested as she and Ethan carefully lifted each one. The shepherds seemed to sense their good intentions, offering no resistance despite their obvious military training. They arranged the dogs in the back of the van, cushioning them with more blankets found under the seats. Ethan insisted on sitting in the back with them, speaking soft words of encouragement as Lydia carefully turned the van around. "The brown one's shivering really bad, Mom," Ethan reported, his voice thick with concern. "We'll be home soon," Lydia assured him, though worry gnawed at her stomach. What was she getting them into? 3 dogs would mean 3 mouths to feed, 3 beings to care for when they were already stretching every dollar to its limit. The van's engine protested as they made their way down the rural road, its familiar rattles and squeaks somehow more pronounced in the tense atmosphere. In the rearview mirror, Lydia could see Ethan hunched over the dogs, his small hands gentle as he checked on each one in turn. One of the shepherds let out a soft whimper, and Ethan immediately leaned closer. "Don't worry," he whispered. his voice carrying clearly in the quiet van. "We'll save you." Lydia's heart squeezed in her chest as she drove on through the gathering darkness, heading toward their farmhouse. The weight of responsibility settled heavily on her shoulders, but mixed with it was something else. A feeling that somehow, despite all logic, they were doing exactly what they were meant to do. The van's headlights cut through the winter gloom, illuminating the snow-covered path ahead. In the back, the dog's soft whimpers mingled with Ethan's gentle murmurs of comfort, a symphony of hope and uncertainty as they made their way home. The old farmhouse stood dark against the purple evening sky as Lydia pulled into the gravel driveway. Snow crunched under the van's tires as she parked as close to the mudroom door as possible. The temperature had dropped even further, and her breath formed thick clouds in the frigid air. "We need to get them inside quickly," Lydia said, opening the van's back doors. The dogs lay huddled together, their bodies trembling despite the blankets. "Ethan, go turn up the furnace and grab some old towels from the laundry room." Ethan nodded and rushed toward the house, his boots leaving deep prints in the fresh snow. The ancient lock stuck for a moment before he managed to wrench the door open. Lydia heard the familiar groan of the furnace as it struggled to push warm air through the vents. The largest shepherd whimpered as Lydia touched its side. "I know, boy. We're going to help you." She wrapped the blanket more securely around him and carefully lifted. The dog was heavy, but somehow she managed to carry him to the mudroom. Her arms trembled with the effort as she gently laid him on the worn linoleum floor. Going back for the second dog, Lydia's mind raced with worries. The responsible thing would be to call animal control. They'd have resources, veterinarians, everything these animals needed. But something about the military-style collars made her hesitate. Ethan returned with an armload of towels just as she was bringing in the last shepherd. "I filled some bowls with water," he said, laying the towels out to make soft beds. "Should I get them something to eat?" "Let's try some warm broth first," Lydia said, brushing snow from her coat. Their stomachs might be too weak for solid food. She headed to the kitchen, where the furnace's rattling seemed louder than usual. The old house creaked and groaned against the winter wind. Opening a can of chicken broth, Lydia warmed it slowly on the stove. Through the doorway, she watched Ethan sitting cross-legged on the mudroom floor, speaking softly to the dogs. He was so gentle with them, carefully offering water one at a time. The shepherd's eyes followed his movements, but they seemed too weak to lift their heads. "Mom?" Ethan called out. "You're not going to call animal control, are you?" His voice wavered. "They might put them to sleep if nobody claims them." Lydia carried the warm broth to the mudroom, kneeling beside her son. "Honey, these dogs need medical care. We don't even know if they're sick or injured." She touched one of the worn leather collars, examining it more closely. The material was high quality despite its age, with strange markings she didn't recognize. "Please, Mom," Ethan begged. "Just give them a chance. Look, they trust us already." As if to prove his point, the smallest shepherd pressed closer to him, seeking warmth. Lydia watched as Ethan carefully spooned small amounts of broth near each dog's mouth. The shepherds lapped weakly at the warm liquid, managing only a few sips before turning away. "At least it was something. These collars," Lydia said, more to herself than Ethan. "They're not ordinary pet collars." A thought struck her, and she reached for her phone. "I'm going to call Mr. Garrett. He might know something about this." Tom Garrett lived in the old farmhouse down the road. He'd helped them with various repairs since they'd moved in 2 years ago, and Lydia knew he'd served in the military. If anyone would recognize these collars, it would be him. The phone rang 3 times before Tom's gruff voice answered. "Evening, Lydia. Everything all right? I'm sorry to bother you so late, Tom, but we found 3 German shepherds nearly frozen in the snow. They're wearing some kind of military-style collars, and I thought." She trailed off, suddenly unsure how to explain their situation. There was a pause on the other end. "Military collars, you say? I'll be right over." While they waited, Lydia and Ethan continued trying to warm the dogs. The furnace wheezed overhead, struggling to heat the drafty house. Ethan had wrapped himself and the smallest shepherd in a blanket, while the other 2 pressed close on either side of him. "See, Mom?" Ethan whispered. "They know we're helping them. Dogs can sense good people." Before Lydia could respond, heavy boots stomped on the porch, and Tom Garrett's tall figure filled the doorway. Snow dusted his gray hair, and his weathered face was red from the cold. "Evening," he said, removing his boots. His eyes went straight to the dogs, and something in his expression changed. He knelt beside them, his movements careful and deliberate. The largest shepherd lifted its head slightly, meeting Tom's gaze. Tom reached out slowly, letting the dog smell his hand before gently examining the collar. His fingers traced the markings Lydia hadn't been able to decipher. After a long moment, Tom sat back on his heels and muttered, "These aren't just pets, they're trained." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning Lydia didn't yet understand. Outside, the wind howled against the windows, and the old furnace rattled on, trying its best to keep the cold at bay. The kitchen's yellow light cast long shadows as Tom Garrett settled into a wooden chair, wrapping his weathered hands around a steaming mug of coffee. In the corner, Ethan sat on the floor with the 3 German shepherds huddled close, their breathing now steadier than before. Outside, the winter storm raged, pelting snow against the windows like tiny fists demanding entry. "Thank you for coming over so late," Lydia said, pulling up a chair across from Tom. She couldn't shake the feeling that these weren't ordinary lost dogs. Tom took a long sip of coffee before speaking. "Those tags they're wearing, they're military issue, though pretty old now. Probably from 10, maybe 15 years back." He paused, watching the largest shepherd lean into Ethan's gentle touch. "Reminds me of something, actually. There was this veteran who lived out past Miller's Creek, Major Daniel Cross. Kept to himself mostly, but word was he worked with military dogs." "What happened to him?" Ethan asked eagerly, looking up from his spot on the floor. The smallest shepherd had rested its head in his lap, eyes half closed. Tom's expression grew distant. "Nobody really knows for sure. He just disappeared one day, must be 5 or 6 years ago now. Some folks said he couldn't handle civilian life, walked away from everything." He shook his head slowly. "Never sat right with me, that story. Man like that, with his background, he wouldn't just abandon his post, so to speak." "What was his background?" Lydia asked, drawn in despite her practical concerns about harboring 3 large dogs they couldn't afford to feed. "Special forces, from what I heard. Worked with military working dogs, training them for search and rescue, that sort of thing." Tom leaned forward, his voice dropping slightly. "After his wife passed, he started some kind of private program, Operation Shepherd's Watch I think it was called. Trained dogs to help veterans with PTSD." Ethan's eyes widened. "So these might be his dogs?" "Could be," Tom nodded. "The style of those collars matches what the military was using back then. And these animals." He gestured toward the shepherds. "They're not just well trained, they've got that look about them. Military dogs carry themselves different, even when they're down like this." Lydia watched as one of the dogs lifted its head to nuzzle Ethan's hand. Despite their weakened state, there was something dignified about them, a quiet strength in their bearing. "But if they belong to Major Cross, where have they been all this time? And why show up now? That's the mystery, isn't it?" Tom took another sip of coffee. "Cross lived way out in the woods, had quite a bit of land. Story goes he was working with about a dozen dogs when he vanished. Nobody ever found them, assumed they either ran off or—" He didn't finish the sentence. "Mom," Ethan said, his voice urgent with excitement, "we have to help them. Maybe they can lead us to Major Cross, like in those rescue dog movies." "Honey, we don't even know if these are his dogs," Lydia said gently, though she felt the same pull of curiosity. "And right now, they need rest and probably a vet. The vet clinic in town opens at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning," Tom offered. "I know Dr. Martinez, she does work with service animals. I can make a call, get you in first thing." "Tom, I appreciate that, but I can't afford." "Let me help with that," he interrupted firmly. "Consider it my contribution to helping fellow veterans, even if they've got 4 legs." The wind howled outside, rattling the kitchen windows. The old furnace kicked on with a groan, pushing warm air through the vents. Ethan had begun humming softly to the dogs, a lullaby Lydia used to sing to him when he was smaller. "Tell me more about Major Cross," Ethan requested, still stroking the shepherd's fur. "Did you ever meet him?" Tom settled back in his chair. "Only once, at the hardware store in town. Quiet man, carried himself like someone used to giving orders, but his eyes," he paused, considering. "They had that look you sometimes see in soldiers who've seen too much. Sad, but determined too." "And nobody ever found out what happened to him?" Lydia asked. "Police did a search when his daughter reported him missing. Found his truck at the house, everything in order inside. No signs of struggle. Just gone." Tom's face darkened slightly. "Some people jumped to conclusions, said he must have walked into the woods on purpose. But I served with men like him. They don't just give up. As Tom spoke, one of the shepherds shifted position, pressing closer to its companions. The movement caught Lydia's eye. Something glinted dully beneath the dog's collar, caught in the worn leather. Standing slowly, trying not to startle the animals, Lydia moved closer. There's something. She reached out carefully, her fingers finding cold metal beneath the collar. With gentle pressure, she worked it free. Holding it up to the lamp, she examined what appeared to be a tarnished metal. Tom leaned forward, his coffee forgotten, as the light caught the worn surface. The room grew quiet except for the constant drumming of snow against the windows and the soft breathing of the dogs, as if everyone sensed they were on the verge of discovering something important. The morning sun struggled through heavy clouds, casting weak light across Lydia's kitchen. Steam rose from the skillet where eggs sizzled, their rich aroma mixing with the scent of brewing coffee. In the mudroom, Ethan sat cross-legged on the floor, carefully spooning warm broth into 3 shallow bowls. "Easy now," he murmured as one of the shepherds lifted its head, nose twitching. "You've got to eat slow to get strong again." Tom hadn't gone home last night, choosing instead to doze in the old armchair, keeping watch over their unexpected guests. Now he sat at the kitchen table, turning the tarnished metal over and over in his weathered hands. His reading glasses perched on the end of his nose as he squinted at the worn engravings. "This is military all right," he said, voice rough from lack of sleep. "Special Forces Recognition Medal. The name's worn down, but I'd bet my pension it belonged to Cross." Lydia slid scrambled eggs onto 3 plates. "The dogs are looking better this morning. Amazing what a warm place to sleep can do." "And love," Ethan added, appearing in the doorway with empty bowls. "They drank all the broth, Mom. Can I give them more?" "Let's wait a bit," she replied, ruffling his hair. "We don't want to overwhelm their stomachs." She glanced at the clock on the wall. "After breakfast, I need to run to the grocery store. We're almost out of everything, and now we need dog food too." "I'll stay with them," Tom offered, finally setting the metal down. "These boys need watching, and I've got nowhere else to be today." The local grocery store was busier than usual for a weekday morning. Lydia pushed her cart down the pet food aisle, calculating costs in her head. Behind her, she could hear Mrs. Peterson and Barbara Collins, 2 of the town's most notorious gossips, discussing something in hushed but carrying voices. "Those German shepherds that went missing when Daniel Cross disappeared," Mrs. Peterson was saying. "Jenny at the diner swears they're the same ones." "Well, I always thought there was more to that story," Barbara replied. "My Harold used to do business with Cross, said he was acting strange those last few months, paranoid-like. Some say he hid something valuable out there on that property of his. Why else would a decorated officer just vanish into thin air?" Lydia pretended to study the ingredients on a bag of dog food, her ears burning. "Military secrets, maybe?" Mrs. Peterson whispered. "Or worse, those dogs probably know exactly where he went. Or where he's buried," Barbara added darkly. Lydia grabbed the largest bag of dog food she could afford and hurried toward the checkout, but not before catching one last snippet. "Those shepherds showing up now? Mark my words, there's trouble coming." The rest of the day passed in a blur of worry and wondering. Tom helped her carry in the groceries, then spent the afternoon examining the dogs more closely, noting details about their training and condition. The shepherds seemed stronger, more alert, though they stayed close to Ethan whenever possible. As evening approached, Lydia started preparing dinner, trying to push the townspeople's gossip from her mind. The kitchen filled with the homey smell of chicken soup, enough for everyone, including 3 convalescing dogs. Suddenly, one of the shepherds, the largest one, whom Ethan had nicknamed Chief, began pawing frantically at the back door. Its nails scraped against the wood as it whined, tail rigid with urgency. "What's wrong with him?" Lydia asked, alarmed. Tom stood from his chair, watching intently. "He wants out. And not for the usual reasons. Look at his posture. He's trying to tell us something." Before either adult could stop him, Ethan had already opened the door. Chief bounded out into the snowy twilight, with Ethan close behind. "Ethan," Lydia called, grabbing her coat, "don't you dare go far." But Ethan was already following the dog across the field behind their house, his boots crunching through the crusty snow. Chief moved with purpose, stopping occasionally to make sure the boy was still following. The other 2 shepherds watched from the doorway, whining softly. The dog led them to the far edge of Lydia's property, where an old outbuilding sat half buried in snowdrifts. It had been there when they bought the place, just another dilapidated structure Lydia hadn't had time or money to deal with. Chief circled it once, then sat, staring intently at the weather-worn doors. Ethan stood perfectly still for a moment, then turned back toward the house. His voice carried clearly through the cold air. "Mom, you need to see this." Lydia's breath came out in white puffs as she hurried across the snowy field, Tom close behind. The old outbuilding loomed before them, its weathered wood nearly black against the pristine snow. Ethan stood waiting, the battery-powered lantern casting long shadows across the ground. Chief sat alertly beside him, while the other two shepherds had followed at a distance, watching intently. "It's locked, Mom," Ethan said, pointing to a rusted padlock on the door. "But look, there are scratches around it, like someone used it recently." Tom stepped forward, examining the lock closely. "These marks aren't new, they're oxidized. But you're right about one thing, this building's been used more recently than the rest of the property." He brushed away some snow, revealing distinctive scrape marks in the frozen earth. "See these? Someone cleared a path here, maybe a year or two ago." Lydia wrapped her arms around herself, shivering. "We need to clear this snow if we want to get inside. Ethan, hold the light steady while Tom and I work." They found 2 old shovels in Lydia's garage and began the arduous task of clearing the heavy snow from the door. The dogs watched with evident interest, Chief occasionally whining when they slowed their efforts. "Whatever's in here," Tom said between shovelfuls, "those dogs know about it. Their behavior is too deliberate." After 20 minutes of hard work, they had cleared enough snow to access the door properly. Tom steadied the padlock, then returned to his truck, coming back with a pair of bolt cutters. "Standard military issue lock," he explained. "I've dealt with hundreds like it." The lock broke with a sharp crack that echoed across the silent field. Tom and Lydia pulled the doors open, hinges groaning in protest. Stale air rushed out, carrying the musty smell of long-abandoned spaces. Ethan lifted the lantern higher, illuminating the interior. Dusty wooden crates lined one wall, their stenciled markings faded but still legible. U.S. Military supplies. In the center of the small space sat a large olive-drab trunk, its surface covered in a thick layer of dust, except for one corner, where clear paw prints marked recent investigation. "That's a military footlocker," Tom said quietly. "Standard issue for officers." They carefully moved inside, the dogs following without hesitation. Tom knelt beside the trunk, examining its heavy-duty locks. "These are corroded. Might take some doing, but I can get them open." While Tom worked on the locks, Lydia and Ethan explored the crates. Most contained mundane supplies, blankets, first aid kits, preserved rations, all carefully packed and inventoried. "Mom, look." Ethan pointed to writing on the trunk's lid, barely visible beneath the dust. Lydia wiped it clean with her sleeve, revealing stenciled letters. "Maj D. Cross Special Forces." The lock finally gave way with a grinding sound. Tom paused, hands resting on the lid. Whatever's in here, it meant something to him. Important enough to lock away and protect. Lydia nodded, placing her hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Open it." The lid creaked open, revealing neat stacks of documents, books, and photographs. Tom carefully lifted out a leather-bound journal, its pages yellow with age. Beneath it lay several manila envelopes stuffed with papers, and a stack of photographs held together with fraying rubber bands. "Operation Shepherd's Watch," Tom read from one of the document folders. "I've never heard of it." Lydia picked up another journal, opening it gently. The handwriting inside was precise, military neat. "These are his war journals," she said softly. "Look at the dates, they go back years." Ethan had found the stack of photographs and was carefully separating them. "Mom," he gasped. "Look at this one." The photograph showed a younger Major Cross, his uniform crisp and decorated, standing proudly with 3 German shepherds, unmistakably younger versions of the dogs now watching them. Cross's face was stern, but his eyes held warmth as he looked at his canine charges. "These are our dogs," Ethan whispered, clutching the photo. "They were with him all along." Tom was leafing through one of the journals. "There's more here than just war stories. Letters too, dozens of them. Never mailed." He held one up, showing the address, Claire Cross, 723 Maple Street. "His daughter?" Lydia asked. Tom nodded. "According to the dates, these were written after his wife died. Looks like he never sent them." They carefully gathered everything from the trunk, journals, photographs, letters, and official documents, wrapping them in Lydia's coat to protect them from the snow. The dogs followed them back to the house, their manners somehow different now, as if a mission had been accomplished. In Lydia's warm kitchen, they spread the materials across the table. The journals alone filled a neat stack 6 inches high. The dogs settled nearby, watching as if standing guard over their former master's possessions. Ethan couldn't take his eyes off the photograph of Cross and the Shepherds. "They were heroes," he said softly. "All of them. That's why they came to us, to show us this." Lydia picked up the topmost journal, its leather cover smooth beneath her fingers. The weight of history, of one man's life, his secrets, his pain, and perhaps his redemption, seemed to pulse from its pages. "Mom," Ethan said, eyes bright with curiosity and compassion, "can we read them tonight?" The winter wind howled outside as Lydia, Tom, and Ethan gathered around the kitchen table. Power lines damaged by the storm left them dependent on candlelight, casting dancing shadows across the weathered pages of Major Cross's journals. The 3 German shepherds lay in a protective circle around them, their eyes reflecting the flickering flames. Lydia opened the first journal, its leather cover creaking softly. Her voice was quiet but steady as she began to read. April 15, 2003. Today marks 1 year since Sarah's passing. The fire took everything: my home, my love, my reason for being. Claire won't speak to me, says I chose the military over family. Maybe she's right. I should have been there, should have protected them. The dogs are all I have left now. They don't judge, they just stay. Ethan leaned closer, one hand absently stroking the nearest shepherd's fur. Tom sat silently, his coffee growing cold and forgotten. June 20, 2003, Lydia continued. Training continues with Shadow, Scout, and Rex. Their instincts are remarkable. Today, Shadow found a trapped civilian in under 3 minutes, fastest time yet. These dogs aren't just military assets, they're heroes in the making. When everything else fails, their loyalty never wavers. She turned the page, candlelight catching the slight tremor in her fingers. The brass wants to expand Operation Shepherd's Watch. They've seen how effective the dogs are in rescue operations. Lives saved, families reunited. Maybe this is my chance to make up for not being there when my own family needed me. Tom cleared his throat. Cross was renowned for his dog training program, saved hundreds of lives in disaster zones, combat areas. But I never knew about the personal toll. Lydia nodded, finding another entry. December 12, 2004. Shadow and Scout pulled 4 children from a collapsed building today. Rex stayed with an injured mother until medics arrived. Their dedication, it reminds me of Sarah, how she never gave up on anyone. The dogs have the same spirit. They don't care about medals or recognition, they just want to help. As she read on, the entries revealed a man slowly healing through his work with the dogs. Each successful rescue mission seemed to ease some of his burden, but there were darker moments too. March 3, 2005. Tried calling Claire again. Phone disconnected. The dogs knew I was upset. Found them all piled on my bed this morning. Funny how they always know. Sarah would have loved them. She always wanted a dog. I was too focused on my career to consider it. Another regret to add to the list. Ethan wiped his eyes with his sleeve. He was so sad, he whispered. The shepherd stirred at his distress, one rising to place its head on his lap. Lydia's voice grew concerned as she reached entries from the last year. November 28, 2008. Something's not right. Been tracking unusual patterns. The dogs sense it too. They're restless. Project supervisors brush off my concerns. Say I'm paranoid. But after 25 years of service, I know when a storm's coming. The writing became more erratic, the neat military precision giving way to urgent scrawls. December 15. Found proof. Can't trust usual channels. The dogs are my only allies now. Sarah always said, trust your gut. Should have listened to her about so many things. Maybe I can still make one thing right. Tom leaned forward. These last entries. Something spooked him, bad enough to go off-grid. December 20. Lydia read, her voice barely above a whisper. No choice now. Have to move fast. The dogs understand. They always do. My last chance to make things right. Claire, if you ever read this, I'm sorry. For everything. I tried to serve with honor. Sometimes that means making hard choices. Shadow, Scout, Rex, they're my family now. They'll know what to do when the time comes. That was the final entry. Lydia closed the journal carefully, her hands shaking slightly. The candlelight caught tears on her cheeks. The room fell silent except for the wind outside, and the soft breathing of the dogs. Each animal's eyes seemed to hold ancient wisdom, guardians of their former master's secrets. Ethan reached out to touch the journal's worn cover. He loved them like family, he whispered, understanding in his young voice. That's why they survived. They were waiting to show us his story. Tom rubbed his face, looking older in the candlelight. Cross wasn't just training dogs for military operations. He was building something deeper, a bond that even death couldn't break. The largest shepherd, Shadow, they now knew, lifted his head and gave a soft whine. His companions stirred, moving closer to the humans who had taken them in. Lydia gathered the journals carefully, aware she held not just paper and ink, but a man's heart, his grief, his dedication, his final acts of loyalty. The dogs watched her every move, as if ensuring their master's legacy remained protected. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but in the candlelit kitchen, surrounded by 3 faithful shepherds, in the echo of Major Cross's words, they had found something profound, a story of loss, love, and unwavering loyalty that transcended time and tragedy. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the snow as Lydia's van pulled into their driveway. The veterinary visit had taken longer than expected, but at least they had medication now for Rex, the weakest of the 3 shepherds. The old dog lay quietly in the back, wrapped in blankets, while his companions watched over him protectively. Dr. Martinez said he'll be okay, right, Mom? Ethan asked for the 3rd time since leaving the clinic, his young face pinched with worry. Yes, honey, the antibiotics will help fight the infection. He just needs rest and care. Lydia tried to sound more confident than she felt. The vet bills would stretch their already tight budget, but seeing Ethan's devotion to the dogs made it worth every penny. As they approached their farmhouse, Lydia noticed an unfamiliar black sedan parked near their porch. A woman in a charcoal gray coat stood at their door, her breath visible in the cold air. She turned at the sound of their approaching vehicle, her posture stiff and uncertain. "Who's that?" Ethan asked, pressing his face against the window. Lydia parked and studied the stranger. She appeared to be in her early 30s, with dark hair pulled back severely from her face. There was something familiar about her features, though Lydia couldn't place it. "Stay here with Rex for a minute," Lydia told Ethan, grabbing her purse before stepping out into the biting cold. The woman walked toward her, her boots crunching in the snow. "Are you Lydia Harper?" Her voice was controlled, professional, but Lydia detected an undercurrent of tension. "Yes, I am. Can I help you?" "My name is Claire Cross." She paused, letting the surname hang in the air. "I believe you found my father's dogs." Lydia's breath caught. The resemblance clicked into place, which she had the same determined set to her jaw as the man in the photographs they'd found. "Please, come inside. We just got back from the vet with one of them." Ethan had already opened the van's side door, helping Scout and Shadow out while Rex remained curled in his blankets. Claire's composed expression cracked as she saw the dogs, her hand flying to her mouth. "They're really alive," she whispered. "When I saw the Facebook post about 3 German shepherds found near my father's old property, I thought it had to be a mistake." Scout approached Claire cautiously, sniffing her hand. After a moment, his tail began to wag slowly in recognition of her scent. Shadow remained closer to Ethan, watching. "Let's get Rex inside," Lydia said, noting how the cold wind was picking up. "Then we can talk." They carefully carried Rex into the mudroom where the dogs had been staying. Claire's eyes took in everything, the makeshift beds, water bowls, and the obvious care that had been given to the animals. Her professional mask slipped further, revealing complicated emotions beneath. Once inside the warm kitchen, Lydia put on coffee while Ethan settled the dogs in their corner. Claire stood awkwardly, as if unsure of her place in this domestic scene. "The post said you found them in the snow," Claire said finally. "How? How long had they been out there?" "We're not sure," Lydia answered honestly. "They were very weak when we found them. Rex had the worst of it, but the vet thinks he'll recover." Claire's hands clenched in her coat pockets. "I haven't seen them since." She swallowed hard. "Since before my father disappeared. 3 years ago. Would you like to sit?" Lydia gestured to the kitchen table, where the journals still lay in a neat stack. Claire's eyes fixed on them immediately. "Are those? We found them yesterday, in an old trunk. Your father's journals and some other documents." Lydia watched carefully as Claire approached the table, her movements stiff with suppressed emotion. Of course he kept journals. Military habit. The words came out bitter, probably filled with notes about his precious dogs and their training. That's all he cared about after Mom died. Ethan looked up from where he sat, with the dogs, his young face troubled by her tone. That's not true, he wrote about you too. Ethan, Lydia warned gently, but Claire was already turning toward her son. What do you mean? Her voice shook slightly. He missed you, Ethan said simply. He tried to call you lots of times. Claire's carefully constructed walls began to crack. I changed my number. After the funeral? He just threw himself into his work. Left me with my aunt while he went on deployment after deployment. Then he started this secret program with the dogs. She gestured sharply at the journals. Operation Shepherd's Watch. Always some mission more important than his own daughter. Lydia thought of the grief-stricken words she'd read the night before. Claire, I think there's something you should see. She reached into the stack of papers and pulled out an envelope, yellowed with age but never opened. On the front, in neat military script, was written simply, Claire. Claire stared at it as if it might burn her. Where did you find this? It was with his journals. I think he meant for you to have it. The room grew still as Claire took the envelope with trembling fingers. Even the dogs seemed to sense the gravity of the moment, watching silently from their corner. She broke the seal carefully, unfolding the letter inside. As she read, tears began to well in her eyes. The letter shook in her hands, and she sank into a kitchen chair as if her legs could no longer support her. Silent tears tracked down her cheeks as she continued reading. Years of hurt and anger, visibly crumbling in the face of her father's written words. The old farmhouse creaked under the assault of winter winds, its wooden bones protesting against the storm. Inside the warm kitchen, shadows danced on the walls as Claire Cross held her father's letter with trembling hands. Lydia had moved closer to the wood stove, feeding it another log while Ethan sat cross-legged on the floor between Scout and Shadow. Tom Garrett remained in his chair, his weathered hands wrapped around a steaming coffee mug. I don't know if I can, Claire whispered, staring at the pages. We're here with you, Lydia said softly. Whatever those words hold. Claire took a shaky breath and began to read. My dearest Claire, if you're reading this, I failed to tell you these things in person, and that's my greatest regret. Her voice caught, but she continued. When your mother died, I lost my compass. The guilt of being deployed when the fire took her, it broke something in me. I couldn't face you because every time I did, I saw her eyes looking back at me, asking why I wasn't there to save her. The wind howled outside, making the windows rattle. Rex shifted closer to Claire's feet, as if offering support. I threw myself into my work because I didn't know how to be a father anymore. But Operation Shepherd's Watch wasn't just another mission. Claire's voice grew stronger as she read. These dogs, they're special. We've been training them for mountain rescue, developing new techniques that could save lives. Every person they help is someone else's loved one coming home. Someone else's daughter not losing a parent. Tom leaned forward, his expression intent. The training protocols in his journals, they're unlike anything I've seen. He was pioneering something new. Claire continued reading. I know you think I abandoned you for this project, but every life these dogs save, I see it as a chance to make up for the one I couldn't. Your mother's. I've tried to call so many times, but the words stick in my throat. How do I tell my daughter that her father is a coward who can't face his own grief? Ethan reached up to wipe tears from his eyes, and Shadow nuzzled his cheek. The kitchen fell silent, except for the crackling fire, and Claire's voice. There's something big coming. A storm system that could strand hikers in the high passes. The dogs and I are heading out tonight for one last sweep. I have to try, Claire. Maybe this time, someone else's family won't be broken. I love you. I've always loved you. Dad. Tom stood up suddenly, moving to the scattered papers on the table. The date on this letter, I remember that storm. 3 years ago, February. It was one of the worst blizzards we'd seen. He began sorting through the documents with purpose, pulling out weather reports and patrol logs. Here, look at this. Cross had been tracking a group of hikers who'd gone up despite the warnings. He knew they'd be trapped when the storm hit. Lydia joined him at the table, examining the papers. The rescue teams couldn't go up because of the conditions. But the dogs could, Tom said grimly. They're trained to find paths even in whiteout conditions. Cross must have thought it was his only chance to save those people. Claire's hands clenched around the letter. He went up there alone? In a blizzard. Tom nodded, laying out a map marked with Cross's neat annotations. He had a theory about where they'd try to shelter. Here, Devil's Ridge Cabin. It's an old emergency shelter, but it's hard to find in good weather, let alone a storm. The dogs, Ethan said suddenly. They stayed with him, didn't they? That's why they only just came down. The adults fell silent, looking at the three shepherds. Despite their recent ordeal, their bearing still showed their training, alert, protective, loyal to the end. They wouldn't have left him, Tom said softly. Not unless. Unless they had no choice, Lydia finished. The hunger finally drove them down the mountain. Claire stood up abruptly, pacing the kitchen. All this time, I thought he'd just gone. Walked away like he walked away from me. But he was trying to save people? Your father was a hero, Claire, Tom said firmly. Not a deserter. Those hikers he was looking for, they were found 3 days after the storm passed, alive. They'd made it to another shelter. But by then, the search teams couldn't find any sign of Cross. The wind screamed around the house corners, as if echoing the past storm. Claire stopped at the window, staring into the darkness. He died trying to save strangers, while I was sitting at home, hating him. You couldn't have known, Lydia said gently. He kept so much inside. The dogs knew, Ethan said, his young voice full of conviction. They stayed with him until they couldn't anymore. Then they found us, so we could learn the truth. A sudden wheezing sound cut through the emotional moment. Rex, who had been lying quietly by Claire's abandoned chair, began to struggle for breath. His sides heaved with effort, and his legs scrambled against the floor. Rex! Ethan cried out, scrambling to the dog's side. Lydia was already moving, dropping to her knees beside the struggling shepherd. He's having trouble breathing. Claire, there's medicine from the vet in my purse. Hurry. The room erupted into frantic activity as they tried to help the dog who had carried his master's secret down the mountain. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the old farmhouse, a family pulled together around a legacy of love and sacrifice that had finally come to light. The truth had changed everything, not just their understanding of Daniel Cross's disappearance, but the connections between all of them. As Lydia worked to stabilize Rex's breathing, she could see it in Claire's face, the weight of years of misplaced anger lifting, replaced by a daughter's bittersweet pride in her father's final act of courage. The storm howled like a wild thing as Lydia and Tom carried Rex, wrapped in thick quilts, through the blinding snow to her old van. The shepherd's breathing came in shallow gasps, each one seeming more difficult than the last. Ethan scrambled in after them, his small hands immediately finding Rex's paw and holding on tight. It's okay, boy, he whispered, his voice trembling. You're going to be okay. Lydia's knuckles turned white on the Dado steering wheel as she navigated the treacherous roads. Tom sat in the passenger seat, using his phone's flashlight to help her see through the curtain of white. In the back, Claire had joined Ethan, both of them huddled around Rex's shivering form. The Pine Valley Animal Rescue is only 15 minutes away, Tom said, his usually steady voice tight with worry. Dr. Sarah keeps emergency hours. The van's wheels slipped and slid on the icy road. Lydia's heart pounded as she fought to keep them steady, every second precious. Rex's wheezing filled the vehicle, punctuated by Ethan's quiet sniffles. Stay with us, Claire murmured to the dog, her hand gentle on his chest. You carried Dad's story all this way. You can't give up now. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, the lights of Pine Valley Animal Rescue cut through the darkness. Lydia barely had the van in park before Tom was out, rushing through the snow to pound on the clinic's door. Dr. Sarah met them at the entrance, her gray hair falling loose from its bun. Her eyes widened at the sight of the struggling shepherd, but her voice remained calm and professional. Bring him straight to the exam room. They formed a chain, carefully passing Rex from the van to the warmth of the clinic. Ethan refused to let go of the dog's paw, walking alongside the examination table as they wheeled it down the hallway. His tears fell silently on Rex's fur. Under the bright medical lights, Rex looked worse. His coat had lost its shine, and his breathing was becoming more labored. Dr. Sarah moved with quick efficiency, checking vitals and hooking up monitoring equipment. He's suffering from severe pneumonia, complicated by exposure and malnutrition, she explained, preparing medications. The next few hours will be critical. Lydia paced the waiting room, her boots leaving wet tracks on the linoleum. Every few minutes, she'd stop to peer through the exam room window, watching Dr. Sarah work. Tom sat in a corner chair, his head bowed in quiet prayer, his lips moving silently. Claire had pulled Ethan into her lap, though he was almost too big for it. They clung to each other, united in their fear for Rex. Tell me about my dad's dogs, Claire whispered. What were they like when you found them? Ethan wiped his eyes with his sleeve. They were so brave. Even when they were really weak, they tried to protect each other. Like soldiers. Like Dad, Claire said softly, her voice catching. The hours crawled by. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the clinic, time seemed to stand still. Dr. Sarah emerged periodically with updates. Rex's fever was high, but he was fighting. The antibiotics were starting to work. His oxygen levels were slowly improving. Around midnight, the waiting room door chimed. Martha from the grocery store stepped in, shaking snow from her coat. She carried a thermos of hot coffee and a bag of sandwiches. "Heard about the dog," she said simply, setting the food down. "Thought you might need this." Before Lydia could thank her, more people arrived. Jim from the hardware store, the Anderson family from down the road, even old Mrs. Peterson, who rarely left her house in winter. They brought food, blankets, and most importantly, support. Word of Daniel Cross's story had spread through the small town like wildfire. The tale of the missing veteran, his loyal dogs, and his final act of heroism touched something deep in the community's heart. "My brother served with Cross in Afghanistan," Jim said quietly to Tom. "Always said he was one of the best men he knew." Mrs. Peterson patted Claire's hand. "I remember your father, dear. He used to bring those dogs by my place, checking on me after big storms. Never wanted thanks, just did what needed doing." By 3 o'clock in the morning, Dr. Sarah's tired face finally broke into a smile. "Rex's fever has broken. He's not out of the woods yet, but I think he's going to make it. Ethan's whole body sagged with relief." Claire hugged him tight, both of them crying freely now. The sky was just beginning to lighten when Lydia stepped outside for a moment of air. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world transformed by snow. But what made her breath catch wasn't the pristine white landscape, it was the people. Dozens of community members stood in the parking lot, holding candles that flickered in the pre-dawn darkness. Some wore military uniforms. Others were in work clothes or pajamas covered by winter coats. All had come to honor the memory of Daniel Cross and the loyalty of his dogs. Someone had posted the story on social media, and it had touched hearts far beyond their small town. As Lydia watched, more headlights appeared on the horizon, more people coming to stand vigil in the snow. Martha stepped forward, offering Lydia a candle of her own. "This is what community means," she said softly. "Standing together, remembering together." The flame passed from person to person, until the parking lot glowed with hundreds of points of light. They stood silent in the snow, bearing witness to a story of sacrifice, loyalty, and love that had waited 3 long years to be told. The morning sun sparkled off fresh snow as Lydia stepped onto her front porch, coffee mug warming her hands. Her breath caught at the sight before her. Cars lined both sides of their rural road, and people were trudging through the snow carrying boxes, bags, and bundles. Martha from the grocery store waved from her SUV, struggling with an enormous pot of something that steamed in the cold air. "Hope you like beef stew," she called out. "Made it fresh this morning." The local paper, the Valley Times, lay on Lydia's porch, its headline bold against the white paper, "Lost Veteran's Final Mission, a story of sacrifice and loyalty." Below was a photo of the 3 German shepherds, looking healthier now, alongside a military photo of Daniel Cross in his dress uniform. Lydia picked up the paper with trembling hands. The article covered the whole front page, continuing inside. They'd interviewed Tom about military service dogs, quoted Claire about her father, and included Ethan's account of finding the dogs that snowy afternoon. The story had captured hearts across the county. "Mom," Ethan called from inside. "People keep bringing stuff." Indeed, their modest farmhouse was transforming into something between a donation center and a community gathering space. The kitchen counters overflowed with casseroles, soups, and baked goods. In the living room, blankets and dog beds piled up alongside bags of premium dog food and medical supplies. Claire sat cross-legged on the floor near Rex, the weakest of the 3 dogs who'd just returned from the vet. Her initial sharp edges had softened, like ice melting in spring. She was showing Ethan an old photo album she'd brought from home. "This was Dad with the dogs when they were puppies," she explained, pointing to a faded photograph. "See how tiny they were? He trained them from the very beginning." Ethan leaned in closer. "Were you there too?" Claire's smile held a touch of sadness. "Sometimes. After Mom died, I was so angry at him for being away during the fire. I stopped visiting as much. Now I understand he was carrying his own grief, trying to do something meaningful with it." More visitors arrived throughout the morning. Veterans in their service caps came to pay respects, sharing stories about Daniel Cross's dedication to Operation Shepherd's Watch. His program training dogs for military and rescue operations. School children brought hand-drawn cards featuring German Shepherds wearing medals. Tom arrived around noon, his truck bed full of lumber. "Thought we might build some proper kennels," he explained, but Lydia could see he had more on his mind. In the kitchen, while helping organize the endless flow of donations, he shared his plan. The VFW wants to hold a proper memorial service for Daniel. Nothing fancy, just something to honor his service and sacrifice. The whole town's asking about it. Lydia glanced at Claire, who was now showing Ethan how to brush the dog's coats with gentle, steady strokes. "Have you mentioned it to her?" "Not yet. Wanted to run it by you first, since your place has become headquarters." He smiled, gesturing at the organized chaos around them. Lydia's small home had indeed become something else entirely. The living room hosted a rotating cast of visitors sharing coffee and stories. The mudroom had transformed into a supply station for dog care. Every surface held evidence of community love, cards, flowers, photos, and food. "It's overwhelming," Lydia admitted, "but in a beautiful way. I never expected." "That's what community does," Tom said softly. "We carry each other's burdens." Daniel carried his alone for too long. Later that afternoon, Claire found Lydia sorting through another batch of donations. Her eyes were red but clear. "I've been so wrong," she said quietly. "All these years, I thought he abandoned everything. Me, his duty, his honor. But these people, these stories, they're showing me who he really was." She pulled out a creased photograph from her pocket. "Found this in one of his journals. It's me and him, training the dogs when I was little." He wrote on the back, "My greatest mission, being her father. I never gave him the chance to complete that mission." Lydia squeezed her hand. "You're completing it now, by understanding, by forgiving." The day flowed on, full of moments both small and profound. A group of veterans helped Tom start building the kennels. Local children sat in a circle while Claire shared stories about her father's work with the dogs. The mayor stopped by to discuss making Daniel Cross's training program a permanent memorial. As evening approached, the stream of visitors finally slowed. The house settled into peaceful quiet, filled with the lingering warmth of community love. The dogs, stronger now with proper care and medication, lay contentedly near the fireplace. Ethan, exhausted from the emotional day, had curled up against Max, the largest shepherd. The dog's tail thumped softly against the floor, his eyes half closed in contentment. Claire covered Ethan with a handmade quilt someone had brought, emblazoned with paw prints and American flags. "Look at them," she whispered to Lydia. "The dogs knew all along, didn't they? They knew where to go to heal. Not just their bodies, but all of us. Our hearts." Lydia watched her son sleeping peacefully, one hand resting in Max's fur, his face relaxed into a gentle smile. The firelight cast warm shadows across the room, and for the first time since finding the dogs in that snowy field, everything felt right. They had started by saving 3 abandoned dogs, but in the end, the dogs had saved something in all of them. The morning dawned bright and clear, a welcome change from the recent storms. Sunlight sparkled off the fresh snow blanketing Veterans Memorial Park, where the bronze plaque listing local heroes stood proud against a backdrop of evergreens. People arrived in 2s and 3s, bundled against the cold but warmed by purpose. Lydia helped Ethan adjust his tie, his first one, borrowed from Tom for the occasion. The 3 German shepherds sat perfectly still beside them, their coats gleaming with health, each wearing a fresh blue service collar. The transformation from those desperate creatures they'd found in the snow seemed almost miraculous now. "They know," Ethan whispered, patting Max's head. "They know this is important." Claire stood near the podium, clutching a weathered envelope. Her hands trembled slightly, but her spine was straight. Tom had helped her prepare for this moment, sharing his own experiences of military memorials, teaching her the protocol. He stood nearby in his formal uniform, medals catching the winter light. The mayor stepped forward first, welcoming everyone to this long overdue recognition. Faces both familiar and new filled the rows of chairs. Veterans who'd served with Daniel, townspeople who'd only known him as the reclusive dog trainer, children who'd learned his story through the rescued shepherds. When Claire took her place at the podium, the dogs moved in perfect formation to sit at her feet. A collective murmur rippled through the crowd at this display of their training. She unfolded the letter with careful movements, as though handling something precious and fragile. "This is the last letter my father wrote," she began, her voice clear despite the emotion behind it. "He never mailed it, but now I understand why. He wanted to make things right first. She cleared her throat and read, "My dearest Claire, by the time you read this, I hope I'll have found the courage to tell you everything face to face. But if not, please know that every day away from you has been a battle between duty and love. After losing your mother, I couldn't bear to risk leaving you alone again. So I chose to serve in a different way, training these remarkable animals to save others. Every time they brought someone home safe, I imagined it was your mother they were saving. Every life they protected helped heal the wound of the one life I couldn't. But in protecting you from more loss, I lost you anyway. The storm's getting worse now. There are hikers trapped up on Miller's Ridge. The dogs and I might be their only chance. Know that whatever happens, you were always my first and greatest mission. I failed you as a father, but I hope someday you'll understand. Love takes many forms, and sometimes the hardest choices come from the deepest love. All my love, Dad." Claire's voice broke on the last words. Tom stepped forward, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder before addressing the crowd. Major Daniel Cross didn't abandon his post or his family. Tom's voice rang with conviction. He died trying to save others, just as he'd lived. The dogs stayed with him until the very end, only leaving when hunger forced them to seek help. They found their way to the exact people who would understand their message and honor their master's memory. Tom turned and raised his hand in a crisp salute toward the plaque where Daniel's name would now be added. Other veterans in the crowd stood, joining him. The dogs remained perfectly still, as though standing guard over this moment of recognition. Tissues appeared throughout the crowd as Claire spoke again, sharing memories of training sessions with the dogs when she was little, of her father's patient teachings about responsibility and service. The bitter anger that had colored those memories for so long had transformed into something deeper: understanding, forgiveness, pride. After the ceremony, people lingered, sharing stories and embraces. The dogs accepted gentle pats from children, maintaining their dignified bearing. Lydia watched as Claire moved through the crowd, accepting condolences and congratulations with grace. Finally, Claire made her way to where Lydia stood. Without warning, she pulled her into a tight hug. "You gave me back my father," she whispered, her voice thick with tears. "By saving his dogs, by believing there was more to his story, you helped me find the truth I needed to forgive him." The late winter sun painted the melting snow in shimmers of gold and silver. Lydia stood on her weathered back porch, wrapping her cardigan tighter against the lingering chill. A week had passed since Daniel Cross's memorial, and the landscape was slowly transforming, winter's grip softening into hints of spring. Across the field, Ethan's laughter rang clear as bells as he ran with the 3 German shepherds. Max, the protective leader, bounded ahead while keeping a watchful eye on the boy. Luna, gentle and nurturing, stayed close to Ethan's side, matching his pace. Shadow, once the weakest but now recovered, playfully nipped at their heels. "Come on, guys," Ethan called out, his breath visible in the crisp air. The dogs responded instantly, their training still evident in their precise movements even during play. Lydia smiled, remembering how close they'd come to losing Shadow. The night at the Animal Rescue Center had seemed endless, but the dog's will to live had proved as strong as his former master's. Now watching Shadow leap and play, no one would guess how near death he'd been just weeks ago. The dog's transformation wasn't just physical. Their spirits had healed too, just as they'd helped heal the hearts around them. Lydia thought of Claire, who now visited almost daily. The bitterness that had once shadowed her face had melted away like the snow, replaced by a gentle peace that reminded Lydia of the spring thaw. Yesterday, Claire had brought over an old photo album she'd found while cleaning out her apartment. She and Ethan had spent hours looking through pictures of a younger Daniel Cross training the dog's predecessors. "I'd forgotten how much joy he found in this," Claire had said, touching a photo of her father laughing as a puppy licked his face. "I was so angry about him choosing the dogs over me. I never understood he was trying to save others from feeling the loss we did." The town had changed too. Where Daniel Cross had once been whispered about as the crazy recluse who'd abandoned his duty, now his story was told with pride. Tom had helped establish a small fund in Daniel's name to support training service dogs for veterans. The first fundraiser had drawn twice the expected crowd. Lydia watched as Ethan threw a stick, all 3 dogs racing after it in perfect formation. Their movements were poetry, disciplined yet joyful, their military training blending seamlessly with their renewed zest for life. They were living bridges between what was lost and what remained, between duty and love, between sorrow and healing. The old farmhouse behind her felt different now, too. Once a symbol of her struggles as a single mother, it had become a gathering place for new friends and renewed hope. The dog's presence had transformed it from a house of quiet survival into a home full of life and purpose. A burst of laughter drew her attention back to the field. Ethan had fallen backward into a snowdrift, and the dogs were circling him worriedly until they realized he was making snow angels. Then they flopped down beside him, tails wagging, joining in his joy. Sunlight caught the scene, turning the melting snow to diamonds around them. Ethan's face glowed with happiness as the dogs showered him with affection, their dark coats gleaming with health and vitality. Watching them, Lydia felt a deep sense of peace settle over her heart. Sometimes, she thought, watching her son play with these living links to a hero's legacy, the past comes back, not to haunt us, but to heal us. If even one moment stayed with you, hit subscribe. I'll be back tomorrow with another story written gently for the heart.